welcome everyone to City of Little Rock Board of Directors agenda meeting for June 25th to set the June 2nd, 2024 July 2nd, 2024 board meeting. We'll also want to share that we will do as an update the downtown master plan will be, we'll have a virtual discussion about that. City Director Miller, we got that scheduled on July 2nd, and then ultimately to put on the agenda on July 9th for we'll do a resolution. It's not required, but we know the Planning Commission did, but I think we want to we'll get the city attorney to draft a very brief resolution in support of the master plan, assuming the board supports it after the virtual demonstration. Board members, are there any questions as it relates to items 1 through 11?
Yes.
Director, your hand up, Director Miller?
Yeah, I didn't put my hand up. Sorry.
I'm trying to get you to do it.
Yeah, I'm trying to develop that habit.
I don't know either. Director Miller?
Yes, I certainly support number 6 and 7. I'm just curious as to, in the past, how much is that 50% that the city's paid has been on those? And maybe somebody get that information maybe before, or if they have it now, or before the meeting.
We'll get that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions on items 1 through 11? Items 1 through 11? Items 1 through 11. Any questions on item number 12? Any questions on item number 12? Director Hines here. Yes. All right. Any questions on items 1 through 11? Any questions on items 1 through 11? Any questions on items 1 through 11? Any questions on item 12? Any question on item 12? Any question on item 12? All right, we'll now transition to the policy discussion. As we all shared, we'll have policy discussions. Today, the first discussion will be the short-term rental policy. I think we all know, as I asked Brad Jordan, our interim Planning and Development Director, to approach as I kind of give some very brief remarks, and then we'll go right into his presentation. Clearly, the city board worked with a number of different residents and property owners to develop our short-term rental ordinance. I think we all can agree it was a first step, and a part of that first step is to now revisit it, as we've now had close to 110, maybe 108 applications. The city board has seen many of those applications. There has been some issues as it relates to enforcement. There's been issues as it relates to enrollment, and there's been issues with the approval process, and we want potential, I'm trying to find the right word, but potential issues with disapproval from the city board that has now created legal opportunities. And so because of that, we want to revisit the process. Ashley is passing out the short-term rental presentation. We do want to share in the presentation, you'll see a process map that was done by one of our executive interns that's here from the summer, Ms. Zoda. We're grateful for that very detailed process map and flow chart. And this flow chart is what our residents have to go through with our short-term rental process. You also will have passed out shortly is a short-term rental ordinance. I think Ashley also passed that out. And so we'll go with the presentation, and then we'll kind of talk through some potential opportunities. One, we need to ask ourselves the question, is the process correct? today? Do we need to amend the process, alter the process, or keep the process? Number two, how do we increase enforcement of whatever ordinance that we put in place? There are some solutions to that that Emily's looked into that'll be fleshed out here. And then three, how do we address from a board level? There's also a question, does the board, in many other cities, and this is a question for the board to consider after you have the presentation, in many cities, the governing body, the legislative body, does not hear the application unless it is an appeal. It normally goes through the planning and zoning process and resides there. There's a need for legal issues, it stops there. And then if there's an appeal, it then goes to the city board. So basically, you all wouldn't normally, in most cities, you don't see an application every Tuesday, 100 applications. That's up to the board if you all want to continue to see that as we get up to that cap from that standpoint, but majority cities don't do that. And again, we know this is the first step. This is all up to the city board and what you all choose from that standpoint. And then the last probably question is timeline, particularly for those who are offending the current process as today, and if we need to change it as well. So those are certain things that we'll discuss, but before we do that, I want to set the atmosphere, and Brad will go through the presentation. Again, you have the presentation in your hand, you have the existing ordinance, you have the process flow chart, and we'll hope to try to discuss those 3 to 4 things I just previously shared as things we need to address as a body on how we want to move forward. Everybody got a good understanding? All right. Mr. Jordan.
All right. Thank you very much, Mayor, board members. The planning department was asked tonight to sort of provide a retrospective of the STR process and share some statistics that we've gathered, because the original STR ordinance was passed this time last year. So we've had 1 year to sort of see where we stand right now and what are some steps that we can take to better the process in the future. And I'll keep my comments brief, because I know there's probably going to be a lot of discussion around this topic. So I just want to show you our process map. I really don't want to belabor the point and try to tell you all a process that I'm sure you are very, very familiar with. We treat short-term rental twos as planned developments, and they follow the exact same process. But really what I want to do on this slide is make a distinction between a STR1 and an STR2. So an STR1 would be something that was more of your traditional bed and breakfasts. That has to be someone that the property owner has to live within 1,500 feet of the rental unit. And after the ordinance was passed last year, there was a 6-month grace period that was given to people that were owners of bed and breakfasts or STR1s. And they had to come in and provide documentation that they had been in operation for at least 6 months, and all they had to do is sort of just make an application to our department, and they were approved. So that after that 6-month period was over, then STR1s were treated as special use permits. So special use permits are only voted on by the Planning Commission. Those are not moved onto the board. The only items that you all see are STR2s. And so you can see sort of this process about the way that we approve it and how it moves on to you. And I think right there are some avenues in which the applicant can take through the appellant process. And you can see even to this right now, even after something is denied, an applicant can reapply, and we are held to the standard, is it substantially identical to the one that was voted down? Now, if staff finds that does not reach that level, they still have to wait 1 year to come back and make application. If they want to appeal that decision, our administrative decision, then that would go to the Board of Adjustment. And we currently have one of those items that the board voted to deny. They made application to our office. Our staff reviewed the application, and we didn't think that it reached the level of being unidentical to what was previously denied. They appealed that to the Board of Adjustment, and in July we will have that. We'll have that meeting and we'll have that discussion on whether staff chose correctly or not. So in this one, I just want to say that during that year, or before the year the ordinance was passed, there were already 12 short-term rentals that had been approved by this body. So when we started counting the numbers, so the ordinance spells out a number 500. So we already started with 12. And if you look to see exactly how many applications we've processed 110 applications. 88 of those have been approved by the Planning Commission. We have denied 10 of them. 9 of them were deferred for that particular month and then probably either moved on to this body or denied by the Planning Commission. 3 of those were withdrawn. And the next couple of items, the three STRs were approved after the grace period was given. So those were special use permits. And then 10 came in during that grace period. So there were 13 STR1s that are in that 98 count that the city already has. And you see that we've had 5 appeals of PC decisions to the Board of Directors. And as I said, 98 is the number we have so far in 1 year. To reach that 500 number, I can't even guess how long that may or may not take us. But you all have seen and processed 77 applications. 73 of those have been approved. 4 have been denied. 5 appeals, as I stated, from Planning Commission, and only 1 of those appeals was affirmed by the Board of Directors. So if you want to do the math on it, if you're keeping score at home, I guess. So we had 12 that were approved before the ordinance, before it was passed last year. We have 10 STR1s that made use of that grace period. 3 STR1s were passed via special use permit. And then, of course, you see up there, you all have approved 73. So that gets us to our number of 98. So if it was any confusion there, that's sort of how we got there. And the last slide really almost speaks for itself, and I think this is a really good starting point. You can see the dispersion throughout the city for the STR1s and STR2s. Those are approved. Those are approvals. And you see that there are a couple of wards that have the bulk of these items. And with that, Board, I will answer any questions that you might have from planning staff.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. We'll first have some commentary from Vice Mayor Webb, and then Director Phillips has his hand up.
Thank you, Mayor
And
Scott.
Director Warwick.
Thank you, Mayor Scott, and thank you, Mr. Jordan. I appreciate the time we've already spent discussing this. And first, I want to recognize there are a number of people in the audience from Ward 3 who came tonight, and a number of other people who sent me lots of questions. I only asked Ashley to copy something that was 1 page front and back for you, but I've got 60 pages of feedback right here, and I'm going to summarize that and give it to Mr. Jordan. And I understand that in some wards, this is not the issue for those wards that it is in Ward 3. I appreciate especially that last slide. But I also want to point out that depending on the day you check, you may be able to find more than 60 in close proximity to the location on Kenyon that we voted down a couple of weeks ago. You might find over 70 near the property on Polk that we voted down a little over a month ago. In one search last night, we found more than 80 on one platform in Hillcrest. I've done several searches today, and on one platform, I found 588 currently operating in the city, and that was just on a particular day that I looked at to see if a rental were available. That's well over the cap, and the majority were overwhelmingly in Ward 3. Neighbors have turned out in force to planning, to the city board, and have counted the days checking on circuit court filings. We've had 3 fairly high-profile and lengthy discussions lately on Ward 3 properties, all very strongly opposed by the neighborhood, all opposed by the board 10-0, yet all 3 of those are still operating. One filed suit in circuit court. It was dismissed by the judge, which means on that particular one, there's not an appeal because there is no case. All 3 of those are booked for months. How do you think the families who live near those properties feel? They feel like the city is siding with out-of-town owners who have no real stake in our city and our neighborhoods. I have a court opinion from a federal judge on a case in Arkansas. The case was dismissed, that it dismissed the idea of a taking when it was discussing enforcement of an ordinance, yet we aren't enforcing. We're allowing out-of-town owners and some in-town owners to remove housing stock from our residents. We're often forcing the people we need and want to fill jobs like firefighters and teachers and chefs and service workers, making them move out of our city. This ordinance cannot be a one-size-fits-all, just like the discussion that's being had by Capital Zoning. And I have their 50-page document. If anybody wants to see that, you can ask Brian Minyard for a copy of the study that QQA recently did. They recognize that there are differences even within the Capital Zoning area. It is not a one-size-fits-all, but we are ignoring our neighborhoods. We can balance property rights with good planning and zoning and enforcement, but we are not. We can target areas that need historic preservation and revitalization, but when we ignore our neighborhoods, we risk changing the character of those neighborhoods that made the residents choose to live there. I didn't pick my neighborhood because it had some cool short-term rentals. I chose my neighborhood because it had a house that I could afford, it was convenient to places I need to go, and it was a great place to live with wonderful neighbors and the amenities for which I was looking. By failing to enforce what we have, and if we fail to amend, we have flipped that around and taken away the rights of the residents who live in the neighborhoods. And I'm going to send most of my questions in writing because there are too many and they're too long. But as we talked about before, so I wouldn't surprise you with anything, I want to ask 3 questions. First of all, are we going to get the software that they have in Hot Springs so we don't have to do what we did last night and try to sit there and count how many short-term rentals there are? Second, on the case that has been dismissed in circuit court and the 2 other cases that we had in Ward 3, all within the last month, when are we going to enforce those? When are we going to start to enforce all of these other ones that are operating without a permit? And how quickly can we put together a group of people who might come to you and talk about some revisions to the ordinance, since we know it can't be a one-size-fits-all? Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Webb. About the software, we did discuss, we have discussed some software that is available. I know that we've done some research. The planning staff has done some research. City manager staff and the mayor's staff have all done research. And there is software out there that can be bought at a cost, for sure, that can provide some benefit to us. I haven't really dove deep into those.
Vice Mayor, well, we're going to get the software. We just got to go through a bidding process, and they'll come before the city board.
Thank you.
As far as enforcement goes, the one case that you were referring to that went to civil court and then is still operating, that is one of them that reapplied to the planning department. They lessened the number of people that were going to be able to stay in the property, and that was their reasoning behind it being a not identical application. So that is currently on the Board of Adjustments agenda. And as far as the other ones on Kenyon, we just now got word that they're still operating, and our enforcement efforts will go toward those. And we have, since I guess the 6-month grace period is over, we've been operating on more of a complaint-based basis, maybe sort of wondering where we go next. So we have been trying to keep up with those when they are there is complaints, and certainly the ones I believe there was another one on maybe Beechwood that was still operating as well. So we'll be looking into both of those.
All right,
And
Director.
as far as the last question that you had about revisions, I think we're always open to revisions. I think that's what we're here for. I think that there was a lot of time and effort and work put into the original ordinance, but I don't think that we didn't know what we didn't know. So a year in, we know sort of the lay of the land now. We know how an application is going to be processed. We can normally tell whether it's going to be appealed. We can normally tell whether the planning commission or the board is going to deny it. So I think we're at the spot that revisions to the ordinance would be a proper thing to discuss.
And I appreciate that. I still don't have clarity for all of the people who are watching this meeting and who are sitting in the audience about when these properties that we have voted down that are continuing to operate are going to quit operating.
And I think that's more of we do have to sit down, legal team, because we can send a notice. So there's a few different things that goes into the overarching discussion for today. But board members have to understand, one, this is a new ordinance. Our planning code enforcement officers are asked to do other things in addition to this ordinance. So that's the reason why he said complaint driven. So they don't know what they don't know. However, when we purchase the software, we'll have a more informed opportunity to schedule out and address it from that standpoint. At this point, when we go address those that you just referenced, Director Webb, we will be sending the proper notices and things of that nature. But until we really figure out, there's some other legal components, and also the A&P Commission on how certain things are done with how they collect the taxes, it gets very convoluted. So we'll try to go into that later. But to our knowledge, I don't know how we got to figure out how we can strongly shut down and it happens the next day. And that's going to take some legal maneuvering as well as some A&P Commission maneuvering. So for all board members who don't know, A&P Commission receives the tax dollars from Airbnb directly. And so until Airbnb shuts those individuals off as a host or whatever they may call them, there's a legal process, and our city attorney is working on that. He's already been researching that type of stuff. So I don't want to set the expectation that we have everything in order, that when we shut something down here at the board level, that it's going to happen the next day. We hope that happens with, residents who will abide by the law. However, for those who don't abide by the law, they have to be made to abide by the law. The best way to do that is cutting off their dollars from Airbnb, and it's just a process with the AMP Commission, and this predates this ordinance because short-term rentals were well in place well before we had an ordinance. So just give that analysis. Now we'll go to Director Phillips, then Wyrick, then Director Hines.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Brad, for the presentation. Also, thanks to Mayor and Interim City Manager for allowing us to have this discussion. I think this is exactly the type of things we should be doing. Things happen, you look at them, let's talk about them. Are they working, what's not working, and let's make our city better. So I applaud everyone for allowing us to have this conversation. I have a few different questions, and I hope they're straightforward, but I want to try to be brief. And this is kind of a direct question. When the board denies an application, what information is shared with the applicant? What are we telling them? I know we've had some people try to come back, and we've had to have some redos. Like, what information are they getting?
I'm not sure what is shared after the board denial. I know that when the Planning Commission votes on something, they'll get a letter from Planning Commission staff saying you are approved with conditions. Here are your conditions, or you are denied of your, and then here is your recourse. You can appeal to the board of directors. So I don't know exactly what documentation is given to an applicant when they leave this body.
Okay, so that's something you can look into and
Yes, sir.
get back to us?
Yes, sir.
Director Phillips, one thing you've got to remember is that the action the board takes is the approval of an ordinance. The ordinance does not take effect for 30 days. So within that 30-day period, we're really not in a position that we can enforce against them because there's a referendum period. If the board approves it, then within 30 days, if they can get sufficient signatures, there'll be an election as to whether or not to allow it. And that reality gives the 30-day problem with these in general. That's a part of it. I just want to let you know that.
I appreciate that. Similar question when you just kind of touched on this a little bit, the information that the applicant gets in between the Planning Commission phase and before us. I know there's been a couple folks who've come before us and say, hey, I didn't even know that I was supposed to speak, or I thought I automatically get to speak. Can you enlighten us on that process before they get to us?
Sure. I know that there's a difference between how cards are filled out here and cards are filled out at the Planning Commission. I think that there had been some confusion because at the Planning Commission, the applicant didn't have to fill a card out. They were just allowed to speak. And I think that there was some confusion about what their responsibility was when they came to the board of directors. So I think that's where that problem lied. And I think that that's sort of where the difference is that Planning Commission does it one way and the board does the cards seemingly a different way. And if I've misspoken, please.
And that's my understanding as well. That's the reason for the question, which is, are we informing them so they know what the process is when they get here?
I think I've even seen just recently seen something outside that says if you want to speak, fill out a card. But I think that from a Planning Commission standpoint, we can even go a step further in our letter to them, to the applicant, and just tell them their responsibilities after they leave Planning Commission and what they need to do at the board. So I think that that's probably an easy fix just from documentation from Planning Commission or planning staff.
I think we need to, I see Tom, and I've got a question for Tom on this, is regular order in a meeting. The court's view, the applicant being on our agenda, there's no need for them to fill out a card. And I know the mayor disagrees with this, but regular order is that if you're an applicant on our agenda, you're going to be recognized, and that's why we've had issues with not recognizing applicants because they didn't put in a card. They're already on our agenda.
Thank-
Director Hines, I
would
don't
like-
disagree
I
with
would
that.
like
I
the
follow the
city
same
attorney's-
process that every other mayor's followed. And we also.
Mayor, I would disagree with that.
Well, I disagree with you. It's okay. But I follow the same process that every other mayor has followed. And since that time, since the city attorney shared with us that if an applicant wants to speak, they'll speak. And they've always gotten a chance to speak once we had that issue. But it's no different than any other mayor, so thank you so much.
And just to follow up, because you're both agreeing, we really ought to codify that the applicant in a zoning application shall be allowed to speak. Whether they fill out a card or not, we can encourage them to fill out a card. Where we were in one of these cases that I think Director Webb, or Vice Mayor Webb pointed out, is we were left going into court with the person saying, well, we didn't do it. Well, you didn't sign a card, you didn't do this. Well, we didn't know we were supposed to do that. Well, that's all they're gonna have to say for somebody to say, you had a right of property and you weren't allowed to speak, that's not fair, go do it again. So what we basically did, understanding that they would live with the board decision, and they didn't, but what we did is said, hear it again, and you did. Making that a codified thing also gives us a little bit stronger legal position if they don't show up or if they sit there and don't say anything. You've got this right, and I would recommend that to the board.
And thank you, City Attorney. That's where I was going. And I just want to make sure that the process is clear for our constituents and for us as a board. So I support your recommendation there, City Attorney, just so everyone's on the same page. And then the follow-up question, this may be for the City Attorney. I think the mayor mentioned that other cities, these items don't even come before the board. I think Brad mentioned that the STR1s do not come before the board.
That is true.
And I guess I'm asking City Attorney's opinion. Do you have any concern if we allowed the Planning Commission, I'm not saying, I can't speak for all my colleagues, I'm just asking hypothetically, if we agreed to allow the Planning Commission to handle all these STRs, do you have any concern about that?
I do.
Okay.
The STR1s are the traditional bed and breakfast. There is a mandate that the person live within a particular area close to it. And part of the reason for that, it's just a few blocks, is that, if something happens, somebody can be, they're already there or they can be there shortly. So I think that that's a rational basis for treating that category differently from the STR2s. As to the second one, that's really a major policy reason for the board to discuss. I don't have a problem about how it's done, but I will say that you do pretty much all zoning decisions.
And that's what I was getting at.
And you've had neighborhood associations, at least for the last 30 years, come forward and give a lot more. They were very NIMBY at the beginning. Not in my backyard, we don't want that. But they've really gotten into a lot more sophisticated presentations. This is what the traffic is doing. These are problems we have with drainage. These are problems we have with this. They're parking in driveway. That type of thing is part of the reason you expanded to having ward representatives, because it was easier to get that word to the board of directors than it had been in the past.
Understood. And then last question, as it relates to the STR1s that are now being handled by the Planning Commission, if it's approved and the objectors wanted to appeal, what's the process for that?
The appellant body would be the board of directors.
That's why I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, sir.
Okay, understood. Mayor, I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Tom.
Director Wyrick?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank Kathy for bringing all the information to us that she has with the STRs, Airbnbs, because as I go to the planning commissions, it's pretty evident that most of the ones are in her particular ward. And the neighborhood represents very well at the meetings. They have their story down pat, and typically they have information that's pertinent to that particular location and the reasons why it should be denied. So they've got the case history on Airbnbs, I do believe. A lot of questions have already been asked, and we've hashed around the denial and when the Airbnbs have to shut down and those kinds of things. So I'm not going to ask those questions, but I do have a couple of more. Brad, in the beginning, you talked about that you gave a 6-month grace period for STR ones,
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
and only 13 decided to take that grace period.
Yeah, there were actually 10 of them that took the grace period, and then we've approved 3 as special use permits. So only 10 of them did come in during that 6-month period between passage and then the end of the year.
And what was the big number?
The number was 10. That was the
You
only.
said only 13 came in.
Well, it was 13 or 10 came in during the grace period.
Uh-huh.
And subsequently after that, the Planning Commission approved 3 other STR ones as special use permits.
So we were only aware of 13 total STR ones bed and breakfast.
That's right.
And so all of the bed and breakfast in the city that we know about is covered. Is that true?
I could not say that for certain, Director Wyrick. Are they all covered? Did they all come in? I do not know.
Okay.
We haven't had any complaints that I know of STR ones bed and breakfasts. They've all been STR twos in that category. Someone that doesn't live within a certain that 1,500 feet from the rental property.
Okay. I appreciate the flow chart. It lays out the plan of these SDRs, but I got a little bit confused down here at the bottom of it when it talks about appeal to the Board of Adjustment. And it looks like that's after it was denied by
Yes.
the Board of Directors?
Yes, ma'am. That was just the example I had given, and I'll just restate it just for the record. There was a agenda item that was denied by the Board of Directors. After the denial, they reapplied with our office for the same location for an STR. They lowered the number of occupants that would be allowed to stay, and in their estimation, that was a substantial change in their original application. Staff did not see it that way, and we denied the acceptance of that application. So then they appealed, and the appellant body for any administrative decision from the planning staff would be the Board of Adjustment.
So we've only had one do that.
We've had one do that, yes, ma'am, for STRs.
And in that case, what happens if the Board of Adjustment approves it or denies it? I guess if they denied it.
So let's just say that,
They approve it.
hypothetically, let's say that the Board of Adjustment affirms what staff said. Then it would be incumbent on the applicant to change it further or discontinue using the property in that manner. If the Board of Adjustment overturns staff's decision, then the application that was submitted would automatically go into that 8-week review cycle that every STR2 would have to go through.
Seems to me that and we've only had one,
Yes, ma'am.
but it seems to me that we're circumventing the board's approval if we go that route to the appeal to the Board of Adjustment, because we've seen it, we denied it. They've
Right.
come up with a change to it, and so it ought to go back through. If it's a substantial change, it seems like it ought to go back through the Planning Commission, then through the Board of.
That's what it, yeah, that's what it would do. I mean, we're just saying this has not changed from the application that was denied. And in that case, they would have to wait a year. So if they bring in something that's different, it would just go back through the process again, and this body would eventually see it. How long that would take, I think is up for debate, and because the process is the process, and it's lengthy.
But, okay, so we only did that once. I think we need to think through that before we do it again, because it appears to me that if we've turned it down, they've come up with a change that's substantially different, then it ought to go through the process again. That's just my thinking. And I'm wondering, what did they do that substantially changed the application? I mean, it's still an Airbnb, so what out of that application could they have substantially changed that would?
I'll
warrant a
answer
review
that in
again?
two parts. I will say that the use is the same. The number of occupants that they are saying are allowed to stay there, that has changed. And also some differences in, the original application didn't have a parking plan or didn't have X. Now, this application does have a parking plan and does have these other things that weren't a part of the original application. And they are using that as they're substantially not identical.
Those things, it appears to me that it should have gone back through the process. The Board of Adjustment, I guess they have public meetings, and that would enable citizens to come and object.
Yes,
One does
and
go
that,
that
and yes, ma'am, everyone can always come to any public meeting. The Board of Adjustment is their vote and the discussion behind it is only based on whether staff decided, based on substantially identical, whether we made the right decision or the wrong decision. The efficacy of the use is not up for question. That would be the Planning Commission and the Board of Directors that would make that decision on use.
Director Waring,
I don't believe that was the right action to take. I'm just saying, it appears to me we should have gone the whole gamut again, as opposed to letting them make amendments and then it go to another body. Particularly if the Board of Directors denied it. So I'm just saying, that's the way I feel about it. And we've only had one, so we have an opportunity to rethink that.
we've had several cases where, not short-term rentals, but we've had numerous cases where there's been an application. Remember that the board has given to the planning director the discretion to determine whether or not an application is new and whether or not it is substantial. If I remember correctly, it was like 14 or 15 people could be inside the house that we were talking about, and they cut that down to 8, which was a substantial number. And then instead of parking wherever they wanted, there were only 2 parking spaces and you couldn't use more than that. So the question becomes, is that really enough to make a difference? And that's an administrative decision. If the planning director says no, for whatever reason, then you go to an administrative appellate body, which is what the Board of Adjustment is. You're basically before the Board of Adjustment saying the zoning's okay, but we need to move this wall, or we need to have less setback because of the way things are. And then if the Board of Adjustment agrees with planning, then the individual can go to circuit court to challenge that as a legal ruling. They can't go back to the Planning Commission. If the Board of Adjustment agrees with the applicant, then they go back to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission still has the ability to say, even with 8, even in this location as a new application, it still fits with the community, or it does not fit with the community, and then that decision would come to the Board of Directors.
I'm just going to say one more thing, and then I'll let y'all figure that one out. But when the Board of Directors looks at an application, they're looking at the use, and they're also looking at parking, number of people. They're looking at the whole area as to what's happening at that location. The Board of Directors says no. They say no to the use, they say no to the parking, they say no to the number of people. They say no. But yet, they can go in and adjust just a few things that makes it substantially different. And then somebody makes a judgment that it goes to the appeal of to the Board of Appeal and Board of Adjustment. So if we say, no, we're turning down the use, these others make up what that use is going to look like. So I don't think that was the right decision.
I understand that, but just take that one step further. Had it come to you and it was 8 originally or 6 originally, and it was 2 parking places and they were behind the building and they were on a paved lot, then we don't know that the use really would have been the reason that the board rejected it. Now, y'all don't make those types of factual specific decisions when you consider these ordinances. You don't say, I'm going to deny this because, we've had one recently. Here's the parking, the ultimate sin, they blocked the driveway of an IT worker. I knew doctors and surgeons were important, but any IT executive that needed to get out, we know they've got to get out. I mean, those were the types of things that came to the board when it made the decision. So unless you start making really disciplined, written decisions on your zoning, the planning director isn't the question of, well, what are they rejecting? The board's already made the decision that you can have short-term rentals in certain types of neighborhoods under certain conditions. You've rejected those specific conditions. So now the question, and you can give more guidance on this. I'm not saying you can't do that. But now the question is, okay, those conditions don't work. Do these conditions work? And then the planning director is asked to decide, is this substantial, is it not? Now, sort of as an aside, we've already got an ordinance that deals with certain types of zoning where 8 people is not considered too many in a residential area. So dropping it from 14 to 8 is a difference. And then in this application, they dropped, we're going to park on the street, we'll park wherever we want. Everybody that comes to the 8 can have a car. No, there can be 2 cars there and it's going to be right here. Does that make it significant? The planning commission, the planning director said no. And that's what's on appeal.
I hear you, but I hear what you're saying, but I really do feel like that if we turned it down, it ought to go through the process again. That's just me.
Thank you.
The
City Attorney.
STR1 wouldn't anyway. I mean, this is only for STR2s that it would ever come back to the board.
All right.
There's only been one, so we have an opportunity here to look at it again.
Director Hines.
Thank you. Brett, let me ask you something. So when we passed the initial ordinance, we didn't take any proactive steps to notify any or try to identify all of the short-term rentals, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So, and I know Tom will tell us that ignorance of the law is no excuse, but when we pass an ordinance and we're going to regulate something, notification's huge. I think one of the steps we need to do, since we've identified some software, and I agree with Director Webb, and that I think it's time to, you can never see the unintended consequences of legislation, and so tweaking it, I think, is in order. But I think once we tweak it, we need to know, if there's a suspicion or we know that it's operating as a short-term rental, we need to send notification via registered certified mail without any doubt and put these folks on notice. And I think Tom will tell us that that's probably a good thing. When it comes down to enforcement, I think, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong. On the enforcement side, if we go through A&P, they have a tax lever enforcement that they can shut down an Airbnb just like they can shut down a restaurant or a hotel for not paying their A&P tax, correct?
Right.
So we've got a pretty serious lever there that can happen within, what, 60 days in arrears, I think, is what they're usual.
But you've got another problem, and that is that they are paying the tax. You've got an element of the city saying this is okay, while the board hasn't said that. That's one of the issues that we have recognized needs to be addressed in an amendment to the ordinance. And
Okay.
if I may,
So
one
we're
other-
we'll be able to know who A&P's.
right, we're trying to
collecting
get
on,
all that
okay.
information together.
All right, good, so
So
that'll.
far, we haven't gotten it, and you remember that the DFNA doesn't like to let us know where taxes came from, so.
Right.
Tom, isn't it true that the A&P Commission collects taxes from the platforms themselves? So they receive a payment directly from VRBO,
Not
Airbnb?
as easy, but.
Right. That's how I understand it. That's sort of like elevators. Nobody pays attention to how many can live in there and how much it weighs until it starts to fall. But it's a certificate that says that. There ought to be a certificate in any of these units that says.
And that brings up the other question. These third parties that are facilitating this, should we take enforcement action against them for noncompliance with the city ordinance, much like we went against Greyhound for dumping people at areas that weren't bus stops? And so I know that rears the ugly head of them getting involved at the state legislature, but I think we could figure out a way to partner with them so that this works out to everybody's benefit.
I think you're right, but I think that the way to do it is sort of threefold. One, what I just said, if you're paying the tax, you got a tax certificate is one of the elements that we need to get to make sure that it's done. Our understanding, and this is like from a friend of somebody who lived next door to somebody, so I don't say it's gospel, but that Airbnb and Vrbo have as a part of theirs a question that says, do you have the local approval for this? Well, that says put in our ordinance, local approval means you've got your tax certificate as one of the elements. And then that way, we've got that information, the software will keep up with that. The other thing I think the board needs to do, and I've said this several times, we had a 6-month grace period because we had a situation that happened. I'm not going to tell you tonight what the appropriate period should be, but one thing we've learned is that people are making these reservations as much as a year in advance, and you had that come before you. A couple wanted to be near family, and they did an Airbnb that wasn't registered for Thanksgiving because it was close to everybody, and they made it for the next Thanksgiving. We need to put into effect an ordinance that says, however you've been doing it before, now you're not doing it, you're non-conforming, and you have to stop. And that needs to be put into place. Otherwise, they've got an argument of, well, we're getting to these as we get to them, and so why them and not me? And that's something we have to do.
And then, so, in any case, and this kind of tees up our notification, and I would assume once we make notification, hey, you've got 30 days from the receipt of our certified mail to contact planning and development. Failure to do so, well, I'm sure we could probably issue them a citation. That gets them into our court system, which begs the question, the only enforcement, Muriel, the only enforcement vehicle we have in violation of a city planning ordinance is environmental court, correct?
Basically.
So the question is our environmental court ready to handle an influx of however many hundred citations and enforcement actions? Because that has been one Achilles heel of a lot of our code enforcement issues are in that court, because we're only one leg of the three-legged stool. We legislate, we enforce, but then there's adjudication, and we do not control the adjudication of these issues. So maybe it would be wise for us, I don't know if it's appropriate, but to have some conversations with our district judges, and especially the one that handles these issues. Can they handle it from a staffing level? And are we going to get support to enforce on these issues? The last question, Tom, is there any way we have the ability to make violations of any of this stuff criminal?
Yes, you can. I mean, we've got zoning violations that are subject to the criminal penalty for other types of ordinance violations. But I think you go a step further. And when I said, if you've got your tax certificate, you got to have that so we can do it. If they're in violation, there's nothing that says the city can't notify Airbnb and Vrbo and whatever else we can find and say, these people are not in compliance. Right. And then that shuts down a fact. At that point, I would have troubles going after Airbnb now. But if we had the ordinance in place, and this is not a criticism of the ordinance we have in place, because Brad's absolutely correct. We now have a year under our belt of what's happened. But if we have under our belt what's happened, and we say, yeah, you got to have the tax certificate, and yeah, you've got to have this, and the moment we find you don't, we're going to enforce, but we don't have to wait for a judge to rule you out of it. If they don't have the certificate, we'll let Airbnb know they're not operating in compliance with the ordinance. And then my understanding is that Airbnb won't keep them on the platform.
So one last question, because I've seen this and paid the user's duty when we went on a family vacation to Hawaii, is they assess short-term rentals there a 30% surcharge. And this may go to our funding of enforcement. Do we have the ability to add I know we've got the heads and beds tax through the A&P, but do we have the ability on short-term rentals only? Would we be constitutional in assessing a 30% surcharge for any leases, any short-term rentals are less than 30 days, I think is how the state of Hawaii does it, and Maui.
I'd like to talk to Brad further about that outside of this particular thing. My gut feeling is that when the legislature has said we can charge an A&P tax if it's voted upon, adding a 30% surcharge would be a problem. That said, if we had some methodology on frequency of use, which is what's going to impact the quality of life in neighborhoods, making a frequently used place subject to a different business license than an unfrequently used place, maybe that is something we can do.
Okay, just a question that popped in as our own discussion. I think that's all the questions I had. Thank you. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you, sir.
Director Peck?
Thank you. Thanks, Mayor. I just want to agree and thank Vice Mayor Webb for doing all this work. It's a good thing you retired recently so you could be consumed with STRs. So thank you. And I agree with everything you said, and Tom just said it. It's the quality of life in these established neighborhoods. It's not a problem in most of our wards. You see where they are. I have a lot of friends that live in Ward 3, and I definitely feel their frustration. So I'm glad we're taking a look at this. And Brad, look at what you've inherited. I mean, I know you've been there all along. I appreciate your time working with Vice Mayor Webb on this, and I'm very sensitive to the issue. And Kathy, thank you for doing the big heavy lift. And to those listening and to those here, we're gonna figure it out. We have to. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Director Phillips?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. One, City Attorney, are you going to, at some point, prepare something for us to codify that process?
Well, in conjunction with planning, we're going to try to do that. I'm probably, if it's okay with y'all, going to put together a short ordinance on if you are the zoning applicant, you have a right to speak, and get that out Friday for y'all to even consider Tuesday, because it seems like a smart thing to do.
I just wanted to make sure it was on the agenda, so thank you. And if I heard you correctly earlier, Tom, you said the reason we couldn't do STR2s like STR1s is because STR1 is a special use permit, STR2 is a PCD. I understood that correctly, right?
That is correct.
And I also heard you say, Brad, the STR1s, if there is an objection from the neighbors related to approval from the planning commission, it still will come to us, correct?
If that were to be appealed, yes, sir.
Yep. So I think I'm of the mindset that we should look into seeing if there's a way for that to apply to STR2s. And I don't know if that means that STR2s become special use permits so they can go through the planning commission, and if the neighbors, because I want to be respectful of the constituents throughout the entire city, if they have objections and they want to appeal it, then it comes to us. But it seems they would lessen the need for us to see all these. Based on the numbers you've given us, which it was a surprise to me, we approved most of these. There's only been a few denials, right?
Yes, sir. That's
So
true.
if that's the case, then maybe we can make this process even more efficient and allow the planning commission to handle those, and the ones that are contested, if you will, will come to us anyway, and then we can make the final decision.
Yes, sir.
So I would like for us to look at that STR2 mechanism where it can kind of match the STR1 process.
Yes. I think efficiency is what we're looking for.
And I'm all about that. So I think that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Tom.
Vice Mayor Webb, is your hand still up?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Jordan. And before we leave, I have two asks of you.
Yes, ma'am.
I think you know how frustrated my constituents are and how frustrated that I am over this lack of enforcement. And I get texts 7 days a week,
Yes, ma'am.
photos of the people who are at the places that we have denied. And they feel like we're treating our out-of-state owners better than we're treating our neighborhoods, and I agree with them. And I've got people from all of those properties in the audience, plus I have residents from another part of Hillcrest who are here tonight who live in a part of Hillcrest where there are multiple short-term rentals, none of which have gone through the process, but they're all operating. One of the women went outside the other day and somebody was using her electric charging station, and they were like, oh, well, I just thought it came with the short-term rental. And then I'm not going to say in public what else she saw in the middle of the night when she was awakened by neighbors outside the window. But so I would ask two things. One, and that owner of that property, she did a search. They don't live in the neighborhood, and they have 17 properties. And when I quickly glanced at it, 15 of them are in one part of Ward 3, and they're operating illegally. So if we could move forward quickly, and then if the folks who are in the audience could speak to you, because I don't know that we have to have any, I don't know that we have anything with you on the tax discussion, which is coming up. If you would take a few minutes, so maybe they won't leave with the same level of frustration tonight that I have, if they could speak to you outside. If
Yes,
you would
ma'am,
do that.
absolutely. I don't want anyone to leave here frustrated in any way. I think that's what we're here for. Is to talk this out and to eliminate that frustration and be efficient. And so I will stay around as long as you all would have me.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. As a recap, we'll bring before the city board the appropriate software to track and help with enforcement. It sounds like the city board may entertain a way to deal with those appeals and not necessarily with the approvals, since you all have given more approvals than denials, and that'll have you basically be like other cities and just deal with the contested ones and go through that process rather than dealing with ones that aren't contested, and you won't have as much on your agenda.
Mayor,
Oh, you just put your hand up. All right,
I
Director
did
Miller.
put my hand up this time. Thank you. I want to make sure I understand what this software does. I've heard it kicked around, but I don't know exactly what it does. Please, somebody enlighten me as to what this software is all about.
So the software tracks every short-term rental in the city that's associated with those host sites, whether it's Airbnb or Vrbo or what have you, anything else. It'll show who's in compliance, who's not, and then what we need to do on tracking that process for enforcement.
So if you're not on one of those, excuse me, if you're not on one of those platforms, so we have short-term rentals that, all our short-term rentals are on one of those platforms?
You wouldn't get, yeah, if you're not on the platform, you'd just be a regular renter. I guess you technically could be a short-term renter, and not be on the platform and do it from your Facebook or your Instagram account, but I mean,
So I guess,
we haven't gone that much detail.
okay, so the majority of
Short-term rentals are on
short-term rentals are on
Airbnb.
those, one of those two platforms?
Yes, sir.
Okay, So when we identify the number that are over 500, then what do we do then?
Same process. I mean, those who aren't, once we reach that cap, you can't be compliant. You wouldn't even go through the process. So if you're operating, we would have to go through the citation process and go through all the legal components.
So shut those people down? Is that?
Well, again, I don't want people to walk away from here thinking it's just that easy to shut down. There's a lot of things in place. And I think what we may have done as a city when this ordinance was passed, I think people thought it's going to end the next day. And that's just not the case, because you got to go through all the legal processes. And quite frankly, maybe it was done too soon and before getting all these details together, because many of us didn't realize about the whole tax thing until a few months ago about AMP Commission. So there's a lever there. Granted, they're part of the city technically, so we can maneuver. Director Phillips is on that commission, and so those are some questions that are going to be asked by the AMP Commission. I don't want people to walk away from it because it's just that process is not in place, and we got to go through a lot of legal maneuvering to get there. Because we got to get Airbnb to take them off, and then that deals with some of the AMP Commission funding. Not to say that they won't do anything, but there's a process. They're getting a check right now, and they're not having to deal with that as much as we are. Yeah.
And I understand there's a settlement agreement as well.
Yeah. So it's a lot. So board members, it's a lot of legal minutia, and that's the reason why we got a city attorney's office. But we also got to send, and so once planning sends the citations, it does go to environmental court. The environmental court makes the decision. So it's just doesn't get turned off the next day.
Okay, so
Now, what we can't do is we can make it hard on them with the citations, and that money mounts up and things of that nature, but, yeah.
So let me ask you, and just asking some questions just off the top of my head, make sure I understand. Help me with this. So do we communicate directly with these two platforms and give them a copy of what our ordinances say? I mean, do we do that as a city and contact Verbo and Airbnb?
We can. Yeah, I don't think we've had any communication where the city hasn't. Again, you have to also know the things that were in play last year with the legislature, where really as a city, and quite frankly, that's the reason why we rushed. If we're going to be honest, there wasn't a lot of thought to this, not going to say it wasn't a lot of thought, because there were people who worked on it, but it was a rush to do so because it was almost going to be taken out of our hands at the legislature. So Vice Mayor Webb did meet with a number of different residents and owners and things of that nature, but that was done in a very expedited fashion where we couldn't get a lot of questions answered and things of that nature to beat what we thought what was going to happen at the legislature. If you all remember, the legislature was going to let it be the Wild Wild West. Let's just be clear. So, and that still could possibly happen. So let's be clear on that too. So what we have to do as a city is lay out the playbook and understand once we lay out the playbook, we do the notices that Director Hines shared and Brad, we send out this notice, and then all we got to do is paper trail everything else, because basically it's going to be a lawsuit going back and forth. But outside of that, it's not shutting off the next day when you guys voted down.
Certainly, I understand that.
Yeah.
But it sort of makes sense to me, and certainly I'm no attorney, and I hadn't studied up on that like probably a number of my other colleagues have. But it seems like our communication needs to be with the platforms too, so they understand what they're dealing with when they are dealing with Little Rock, Arkansas.
This is different than the Greyhound scenario. There's a lot. We still are in a property rights state. I think, let's not forget that. They're going to listen to the legislature more on this issue than they will us.
Yeah, I understand. Like I said, my simple mind just thinks that
And I'm trying to do, because I also don't want to offend the legislature here tonight, and they draw up a piece of legislation that nobody wants. So, but I'm also trying to make certain that I'm very, because what I don't want to do is waste you all's time, because you all are dealing directly, we all are dealing directly with the residents, and we got to be straight up with them on what the process is. And when someone offends the process, they're cited, they go to environmental court. Just like a code enforcement issue on residential, it doesn't happen just like then. You got to stay on top of it from a legal standpoint. It just doesn't shut down tomorrow.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just trying to see, I'm just thinking, man, seems like these two platforms ought to know that in Little Rock, Arkansas, this is what our ordinance is. And
Oh, and they're aware of it. They're at government relations. They're aware of it, but we'll have some more meetings.
yeah, so we've communicated with them directly, and they got a copy of it. Okay, I'm just trying to get brought up to speed. Thank you.
Yeah, they are aware of it. Vice Mayor Webb.
Thank you, and I want to clarify two things. First of all, I have met directly with Airbnb.
You have?
I have. I have met with their government affair, with the people they have hired to be their government affairs people for Arkansas. I've met directly with all of those people. Cities around the country are cracking down now and passing tougher laws. And if my recollection is correct, considering that we passed the ordinance a year ago, we started looking at this well before the pandemic started. We had multiple meetings, primarily in Ward 3, to discuss on hold for a bit of time when the bill came up in the legislature, and it was after the legislature adjourned that we passed our ordinance. Because they adjourned in early May, I think, and then we passed our ordinance in June that we had worked on for many, many years. So just to clarify those two things.
Yeah, well, I'm not aware of many years. Again, everyone, we got the legislature. We all know what was going on in that period of time, and we got this ordinance done. We just, again, for the residents, there's a process. Just like when there's a process with an abandoned vehicle at a home or a boarded up home, we cite, we then send to the environmental court. That's the process. If we can figure out a way that we can shorten that process, we want to do that. But that's the process that we currently have right now. What we can do, again, we got to work with AMP Commission because we don't see those dollars, so we can't turn off the spigot when it comes to the funding, which could be the ultimate lever. But we do know this is an issue, it's a problem. It's something that could be taken out of our hands in January anyway. But until then, we got to figure out a way to hold folks accountable. Director Compiers, and I think the software will be the best thing so far.
Mayor, can I ask Brad one question?
Yes, Mr. Jordan.
Yes, sir.
First of all, welcome aboard. I haven't met you, but you've done an admirable job tonight. So
I appreciate that. That's high praise.
there is one of the people I work with is in North Little Rock and has a short-term rental. That was the first one that went through the process and is lauded over there as being a perfect example of how to do it right. One of the things he told me they've done in North Little Rock is much like we've done with liquor stores and things like that, that you can't be so close to a church or a school. They've said you can't be so close to another short-term rental. And as I look at the map, I understand now why Kathy gets so many texts every day that everybody's there. So as you're looking at this, one way to start lessening the burden is if we, not retrospectively, but prospectively, start putting something in that says you cannot put one in unless you're so far away from the prior one. And that may be one easy way legally to take care of the problem we're talking about.
Yes, sir. And I know that the city manager and the mayor's staff have had those discussions along the same lines as you have. Even this afternoon, Mr. Carpenter discussed that and used the liquor store thing as an example, and so I think that's valid.
If you'd look into it.
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of experts in this room, and I'm not one of them, but I think that's a very easy way of starting to lessen the burden, and it'll help Kathy's phone not be so burned up all day long every day.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, members of the board. We'll, again, to the residents, we're working on this accountability issue to increase the enforcement, to get the things in place to get it done. I'm very appreciative of our planning commission. We'll now transition to our sales tax discussion, everyone. You all should have, thank you to members of the city board who provided questions regarding the sales tax. We'll start first. With the, just give me one sec. We'll start first with City Director Phillips' questions. City Director Phillips, you ask your first question. And Emily, if you could answer some, or if any of the members of the department directors are here, they can answer his questions.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I think all my colleagues got a copy of the question that I shared with the mayor. And I guess I'll try to go a little bit out of order and start with number 3, because I think that relates to a question for the city attorney. I've received some questions, Tom, from constituents about the permanent 3/8 cent portion of the sales tax and the board's ability to reallocate if we determine, you know, so many years down the road that we need to use that money in a different fashion. People have asked me, how could we go about doing that? What's the process if we wanted to do that, or if it's possible, as it relates to the permanent portion of the sales tax?
Director Phillips, in terms of both of them, the 3/8 cents and the 5/8 cents, the ballot titles that we anticipate are going to be general. One is going to be for capital matters, one is going to be for operational matters. So if you, even with your resolution saying, here's what we're going to do and when we're going to do it, as you go down the road, y'all are free to change that. It's not pledged to anything, and it's not binding the way it would be if the ballot title said, $1 million to repave Markham University. I mean, that's limited, but if it's you know, $1 million for capital improvements, then repaving Markham University, repaving any other street would be possible.
Hold on, Tom.
Everyone, we know that City Director Webb had a number of different questions. We'll answer the easiest questions. Emily can look through that and answer the easy questions. We got all of the 4 Ps who are here. So if the 4 Ps, once we get done with Director Phillips' questions, if you all would just come up and address Director Webb's questions within the number that she has, and I'll pass it out to you if you all don't have it. Or you guys should have it, and just go through that process, and that'll be it of the meeting.
Okay. Okay, Tom, can you catch us back up?
Right. I mean, that's what deals with that. In terms of if you've got a 3/8 cents that sunsets by election, then you would have to have another election to continue it. If you have one that doesn't sunset, then you would have to have an election to sunset it. That would be a separate election.
So let me make sure I understood that. So as it relates to the 5/8 cents, the 3/8 cents operating that we've talked about, we would have to have another public vote about the reallocation of those funds?
No, the operations that we've got in place, as I understand it, it's going to say operations and it's going to say 3/8 and it's not going to have a time frame. So how you intend to spend that money is to be spent is set out in a resolution. If you find a need to spend it in another manner, the board will have the ability to do that as long as the way it is spending it is on operations.
No, and that's what I want to be clear. But we have a resolution, we're gonna be bound by that resolution. Then if the board could change the resolution if the board wanted to, essentially.
Essentially.
Okay, got it. All right, let's, I guess, go back in order to number 1, and this may be for the city manager. I know we're working on the micro home village. That was on the agenda today. I have questions about how does the allocation for homelessness in our spreadsheet work with what we're already doing with the micro home village?
Sure, so part of that will help run the micro home village, and Mr. Howard is here and can answer specifics for us.
Good afternoon. I think this is a question that Director Webb had, and Vice Mayor Webb had too as well, Director Phillips. But currently, we had budgeted for the opening of the microhome village due to different time constraints, issues that we had with the federal government on the funding side with that, as far as sustainability for those units. We had to make some other plans as far as design of the actual units. So one of the things that we had planned for, if we had a full year to manage the microhome village, received from the actual respondent for the RFP, it would have cost us about $900,000 to actual run the village as far as management. The other things that we're including in that as far as homelessness, we do have a need, and I've asked for that several times in the budget for us, the fiscal year 2024 budget. We need more engagement specialists out on the street. We do pay for other things such as outreach. Also, we have Jericho Way that I know we have in the current budget, but we do have other expenses that come out too as well. In asking for additional staff members to engage with individuals around the actual city, because homelessness is an increasing around the city. So we only have 2 engagement specialists currently right now. We'd like to have more. That's gonna cost, as far as salaries, we have vehicles that we have to purchase for them too as well. And then we actually work with several nonprofit organizations around the city to provide outreach for these individuals. Some of that money came from the actual ARPA funds that we had. And so with the ARPA going away, we don't have any additional funds to pay for those nonprofit organizations that would assist us to help end homelessness around the city of Little Rock.
Understood. So primarily, if I understood you correctly, this money will kind of go to making sure we can operate fully going forward the micro home village to address the homelessness issue in the city.
Correct.
Got it. All right, thank you. Thank you, Director Howard. I guess I keep going down my list. Yes, sir, Director Computers.
Can I just ask, what, Lance is going to leave in a minute. And we're going to have a policy discussion, and the mayor and the vice mayor aren't here, and
Did they leave?
they left. They both left.
I think Vice Mayor Webb had an emergency she had to leave before I was talking to her.
Okay,
in the hallway.
I didn't know that they, okay, so they're not coming back? I don't know anything.
Will,
I think we should defer this if they're not coming back.
I mean, it's silly to have a discussion, I think. And it's,
Well, and I was going to say, I'd be happy to work on getting answers to these in writing for y'all.
Director Computers, I agree with you. I didn't know that they were like gone, but if they are gone, then they obviously need to be a part of this discussion.
Frank picked up his backpack, and I think Kathy has got a problem that she had to go take care of. At least is that, and you're leaving in just a minute, is that right?
Yes.
So you have 4 people that aren't going to be here, and you have the mayor not here for tonight. We may have a meeting for 2 minutes next week. And I would move that we table this to take the questions that you have. I've got my questions, but I just folded them in with Kathy's. Let's have a sheet that you just have written up. You can put some answers on it, and then we go down it next week. But I think it's crazy to have a discussion about a tax when there's no one here.
I don't disagree with you, Director Computers. I didn't know Director Hines had to leave, and I didn't know that they were gone. I thought they were stepping out and coming back in. But if you're correct, then.
It's my 30th wedding anniversary, so I have a hot date.
You got a hot date?
There are higher powers.
Yeah, with a much more important person.
If you add
Director Computers, you don't need a motion. The board can just agree and skip.
Yeah, we're not in a meeting, so we could just leave.
Okay.
Simile, I have a list of questions about Heinemann Park.
Okay.
They have a committee that's been working on things that they want to do. And if you would fold these questions into the ones that you already have.
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. Thank you.
So I guess just to be clear, Director Campiris, our request for interim city manager Cox is to work with the mayor, staff to see if next Tuesday we can address some of these issues.
And this gives you the opportunity
Yes,
to
then we
take
have a
it-
week to look at them and get you good answers and all
and
that.
give us some answers,
Understood.
but I don't, I mean, to me personally, I don't want a written answer. I want y'all's thoughts on it and then us to discuss it.
I don't know.
Because that's what, I mean, the points you've just brought up, Antoine, are what we need to be talking about. But so I'm leaving, bye.
I guess everyone's looking at me. I guess meeting's adjourned.
Okay, good.